Good evening. Welcome to Lessons of Vietnam. My name is Bob Matthews. I'll be co-hosting tonight's show with Mr. Bill Dixon. We have a special treat for you tonight. We have a copy which we promised last week, a copy and a version of our first symposium that we held downtown at the Museum of History, dealing with the early battles of Vietnam, from the Battle of the Hump to the Battle of the Ai Drang Valley, with our special guest we talked about before, with Mr. Joe Galloway, Mr. Joe Marm, and Mr. Cliff Haskins.
Let's go ahead and start it. Everybody, we're excited tonight. We've got the Raleigh Sea Cadets, Raleigh Battalion Sea Cadets with us doing the color guard tonight. They're doing a great job. And this time, retire the colors, please.
Detail, right face. Forward, march. Conlon, march.
If I could march like that during basic training, my drill sergeant would have had a heart attack. Well, that's true. He told me I was the sorriest blankety blank he'd ever seen, and my first day in Vietnam, a little short guy in black pajamas was going to blow my sorry blankety blank away. But I knew he wouldn't know what he was talking about, because I joined the Army because a recruiter told me if I joined the Army, I could choose my location. And y'all know that my ticket to Germany has been lost for the last 47 years. It's in the mail. That mailman is still out there somewhere with my ticket to Germany. I know the recruiter wouldn't have lied. And, we have a member of our organization and a man that I've known about 55 years who couldn't be with us here tonight. He is a big first cav guy. He was in Vietnam in '65 and was wounded. He suffers from Parkinson's disease, and unfortunately he fell a week or so ago and broke his hip. Bob Cox would like to be with us tonight, but when you go home tonight, think of Bob, and he's been a good first cav guy for a long time. He's like I said, I knew him before I went to Vietnam. We were in college. Actually, he was in college and I was in high school. And then he disappeared for a while. Now I know where he disappeared. At this time, I wanted to call up, when we started doing this thing, we wanted to go with the first battles, first major battles. And it's amazing how many major battles there were that were first. The Marines had a battle, which you'll find in your program. To them, it was a major battle. And any battle that you're in is a major battle. And then there was the 8th of November. Some of you may have heard the song that Big and Rich does about the 8th of November, Battle of the Hump. We have some of his posters out front there, 8th of November. And if you look at the posters, he's got some hidden soldiers in there. In fact, he's got Miles Harris, his picture with Big and Rich. But out of that was a Medal of Honor winner, so we've got that in there. At this time, I want to call on Bob Matthews. Bob Matthews was a teacher for 40 years. He kind of heads our educational wing, and he wrote a course called The Lessons of Vietnam, which is in about 1,000 schools nationwide. We were just in Boston presenting it to the National Social Studies Conference there. Bob travels all over the country speaking. In fact, he'll speak anywhere that somebody will give him 5 minutes to speak about Vietnam, and I guarantee you he'll do one more thing. Mr. Bob Matthews, you want to come up?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Bill. Good evening and welcome, and thank you for the opportunity to speak about the early battles of Vietnam. I'm going to speak briefly tonight about a battle called the Battle of the Hump, November 8th. Now, this battle took place in Vietnam, November 7th, 8th, and 9th of 1965. The engagement was 17.3 miles southwest of a town called Bien Hoa. Now, the object of this battle, the 173 Airborne, was sent in to displace units of Viet Cong that were dug into the hills. Now, this battle is not talked about a great deal in the classrooms, but it should be. The early battles of Vietnam sometimes are missed, and we go for the movies and different things like this. This is one of the purposes of tonight, is to uncover some facts that should have been told a long time ago. Well, the 173rd Airborne went in And November 7th, it was light, there wasn't much activity. Then November 8th, all hell broke loose. They were engaged with the Viet Cong, several units of the Viet Cong, hand-to-hand combat fighting for most of the day on November 8th. Hand-to-hand fighting, the area was triple canopy jungle. It was very hard to get air support. It was proven later on November 9th, it was very difficult to get out our dead and our wounded, but we did. The battle was over. It was costly on both sides. The U.S. troops lost 48 paratroopers and many wounded. The Viet Cong lost 438. The battle was a decisive victory for the United States, but at a heavy, heavy cost. After this, we knew we were in for a fight. Now, the Battle of the Hump has a very local flavor, because one of the men at this battle was named Lawrence Joel, born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He was wounded twice. He was a medic, Spec 5 medic at the Battle of the Hump. During the heaviest fighting, he risked his life helping the wounded and the dying. He was shot twice, once in the thigh, once in the calf, and he survived. He came home after being medevaced out, and he stayed in the service. Now, some of you are aware of North Carolina history, and you know about this name, Lawrence Joel. Lawrence Joel was awarded the Silver Star for his heroic duty at the Battle of the Hump. Later, he was given by Lyndon Johnson, President Lyndon Johnson, the Medal of Honor. Lawrence Joel was the first medic to receive the Medal of Honor in Vietnam. Lawrence Joel was the first black American, living black American, to receive the Medal of Honor since the Spanish-American War. Many of the men that fought in that battle were true heroes. This man is recognized nationwide, especially in North Carolina. If you're familiar with Winston-Salem, there's a place down there affectionately known as the Joel. It's the Lawrence Joel Memorial Coliseum. It's named after him. One of 18 children went into service. There is a medical center at Fort Bragg named for him. Fort Jackson named for him. The Walter Reed Hospital, there's a clinic named for Lawrence Joel. You can go around the country. He is recognized nationwide as a real hero. Lawrence Joel stayed in the service. He retired in 1983, a staff sergeant. Lawrence Joel died in 1984, complications with diabetes. He is buried in Arlington Cemetery. My job tonight, and I do this with honor, was to present a brief history of one of the early battles, known as the Battle of the Hump, also called November 8th. Bill referenced a man named Niles Harris, who was involved in this battle and was wounded. I'd like to close with a quote of Mr. Harris about the Battle of the Hump. I'd like to read this to you directly so I don't mess it up. This is what he says. No man gives a greater duty than to give his life for his fellow man in the quest of freedom. As we have said many times in the past, teaching Vietnam nationwide, all gave some gave all. A moment of silence, please, for the Battle of the Hump and Mr. Lawrence Joel. Thank you for the privilege of speaking to you tonight.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for that, Bob. Also, we have the distinction of having from North Carolina the youngest man to die in Vietnam. Dan Bullock was 14 when he joined the Marines. And just about 2 weeks after he got to Vietnam, he was killed in a night firefight. Dan Bullock is buried somewhere in Goldsboro, Mount Olive area. I forgot, Goldsboro? Okay. Goldsboro. And there's a couple of Vietnam vets I know that look after his gravesite regularly and keep it up and so forth. So that's another distinction from North Carolina. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to let our three guests tell you a little bit whatever they want to tell you about. I told them if they want to talk about the weather, that was okay, or that whatever they want to talk about. It's entirely up to them. We're going to go through all three of them, telling you their story and so forth. At the end, we're going to take a quick potty break of about 8 minutes. Because I know that your butt will not, your seat, your pillow won't last any longer than your kidneys, so we want to take a break for that. Then we'll come back and do a question and answer. So if you got any questions, we'll have guys walking around with microphones. Just holler out, and we'll get the microphone to you so you can ask any question you want to ask. And if they want to answer it, they'll answer it. If they don't want to answer it, they don't have to answer it either. Like I said, there are no rules except there is no rules. And at this time, I'm going to start out with Joe Marm because he was the first one in our Drang Valley. Colonel Marm, how much activity, y'all were in Vietnam a couple of months before the battle in our Drang, I believe. How much, I know you went out on some search and destroy missions. How much action had y'all seen as a group before you got to our Drang?
Not very much. We left in August by ship out of Charleston on a merchant marine ship. It's called the USS Maurice Rose. The whole division had to go over at 15,000. The advanced party flew over, but the rest of the division and all the aircraft, 200 helicopters, had to go over on ships. Some aircraft carriers for the helicopters. We went on a troop carrying ship called the USS Maurice Rose, which was a merchant marine troop carrying ship. 2 battalions, first of the 7th and 2nd of the 7th in the brigade headquarters were on that ship.
Well, I understand when y'all got there.
We went through Panama Canal, up to California, never left the ship in 31 days, went through a typhoon in the Pacific, and then made it to Vietnam.
You were probably glad to get to Vietnam then.
Yes, sir.
And y'all,
that was the middle of September we got there.
I understand y'all also had to start from scratch, building your base camp.
Yes.
Okay,
we had to cut, we had to cut our fields of fire. You can imagine a base camp for 15,000. The helicopter pad, they call it the golf course. I know one of my OCS classmates got burned real bad, Doug Foster, because he was throwing gasoline on the green bushes trying to kill them, the shrubs that he had piled up. And it blew back in his face, and he was severely burned. But so he didn't stay with us that long. But he came back for a second tour with 25th Division. But it was just a unique experience. We had some minor firefights, not a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I was a rifle platoon leader, young. That was my first assignment out of OCS. We were in Ranger School, and they needed lieutenants for this division that they were forming up. It's called the 11th Air Assault, that was practicing in the air assault techniques, commanded by General Kennard, who's pretty famous. He told McAuliffe to say nuts during the Battle of the Bulge, or was it the Bastogne? Anyway. The Germans wanted him to surrender, and he said, nuts, we aren't going to surrender. So, but he was a great leader, and we had tremendous soldiers. My platoon, I had some of my E5 team leaders had 10 years of service. Second tour, I went back in '69. You rarely found 1 or 2 senior NCOs because they were expanding the Army, and there just weren't that many senior NCOs around on my second tour. But 2 of my men, they gave M14s, sniper weapons. So I gave them to my 2 best shots, and one of them used it one night, and some bad guys were crossing in front of us in our perimeter, and I thought it was my M60 opening up. And that's a big no-no. You save your M16 or M60, your machine gun, until last. But he opened up with his M14 and killed a Viet Cong. We went out and checked him the next day. So that was the first kill we had in our battalion.
Yeah. Well, Joe, the other Joe, Joe Galloway, in his book with Hal Moore, had a very colorful figure, Sergeant Major Plumlee. Tell us a little bit about how, as a Brown Bar, I guess you were a Brown Bar lieutenant?
Yes.
Brown Bar lieutenant and Sergeant Major Plumlee got along.
He was an awesome guy. You know, you didn't mess with him. You try to stay away from him. But I didn't have that much, that much interaction with him. You know,
And you gave thanks every night.
he was a legend, and I thought he who played him in the movie?
Sam Elliott.
Sam Elliott made the movie, I thought, with some of his one-liners.
And most of those one-liners were accurate. Plumlee said them.
All right, now what I'd like to do is you were wounded trying to get to the lost platoon that was in the battle.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the lost platoon and
Okay.
your actions. And Ben, you were wounded twice, I believe, and just once. The once was enough. And but go ahead and tell us your story and about that, because that's something that is very interesting.
I was a brand new second lieutenant. You know, it was pretty primitive too. We lived in pup tents. We didn't have, and eventually we got the wall tents, but it was pretty primitive. And like I said, we were chopping out our fields of fire, and it took one brigade to provide security around the division perimeter. The other two brigades were out doing search and destroy operations. And we were doing battalion-size operations then. You know, the entire battalion was out trying to find the enemy. And so they were pretty big operations, but, in fact, it was kind of impressive when Colonel Moore then, would come into and spend the night at our company command post, in our company position. That was pretty impressive to have him right there with us. I know in '69, the battalion commanders were in the air all the time because we were all split up doing smaller unit actions, platoon and company size operations. But the battle was pretty intense. It was a 3-day battle, the 14th, 15th, and 16th of November, 1965. And they prepared. We had 2 batteries of artillery, 105 howitzers providing support, and they prepped the landing zone for about 20 minutes, which was pretty standard to prep the landing zone there at LZ X-ray, and we went in with 8 ships. I was the second company in. Bravo company went in first, and they started going out looking for the enemy right away. They did provide a little bit of security while the other units, but it was about a 35-minute turnaround time to get the other units into position. My company, A company, was the second unit in. And anyway, B company, we were about 5 kilometers from the Cambodian border, and B company was out there looking for the enemy, and the one platoon got separated and surrounded. It was commanded by another OCS classmate of mine named Henry Herrick, and he was killed. His platoon sergeant was killed, and his whole chain of command was killed, and an E5 named Ernie Savage took over, and never lost another man killed or wounded in the next 24 hours. He led that unit and provided a ring of steel around his position, and they were attacked 3 times that night. But that first day, we made 2 attempts on the 14th, which was a Sunday, to get up to them. And on the first attempt, they were minus 1 platoon. They were short. They just had 2 rifle platoons, and so they gave my company commander, Tony Nadal, said, "Marm, you go with B company and help them get that platoon out of there." So I was attached to B company, and we went up there to try to get them. Now, this was not heavy like you think of in Vietnam. It was elephant grass and shrubs and trees. It was not a triple canopy jungle like some areas of Vietnam. So a lot of our wounds were upper body wounds too, because we were standing up a lot, or trying to move in. So we moved up there. It was late in the afternoon, probably about 3 o'clock when we made the first attempt to get up to them, and we were getting a lot of enemy fire from the North Vietnamese. They had 3 regiments. We went in at 450. They had about 3,000 scattered around and about. And Joe Galloway has a lot of interesting stories too, because he went back a number of times, and he interviewed a lot of the leaders of the bad guys that were fighting us. So it's pretty interesting. So Joe is, I don't want to steal any thunder from Joe, but we had great soldiers. We didn't make it that first attempt because of the wounds, so we pulled back, and we started up the second time with 2 companies this time, minus the 1 platoon that was still trapped. And we didn't know quite where they were out there either. The fog of war, and we were a little bit concerned about shooting them up, but luckily I don't think they suffered any casualties from friendly fire. But we made 2 attempts. We made the second attempt. We had 2 companies moving forward, and we prepped our front with artillery and mortar fire to try to soften up the enemy. But each unit has their own little firefight. In front of my platoon, there was, like from here to the back of the auditorium here, there was a solidified rock anthill with shrubs and bushes all around it. And I tried to tell one of my men to run up there and throw a grenade over the top of it to silence the bunker.
That was a machine gun position.
But it wasn't dug out. There were machine guns maybe on the side and on the top and in the trees around it.
Yeah.
But not like a typical machine gun.
Not a bunker.
Not a bunker, no. It was a solidified rock anthill, and there were a lot of those there. There's about 7 feet tall. But anyway, in the heat of the battle, he thought I meant to throw it from where we're at, so he pulled the pin and threw it, and it landed in front. So we started to move forward a little bit more, and I told one of my men to shoot a light anti-tank weapon, a law into it. And he armed it and tried to shoot it, but it misfired. Okay, so what you do when it misfires, I took it from him and I closed it up and opened it again, and this time I shot the law into the bunker. And it made a big boom and a big cloud of dust, and it really picked our morale, at least it picked my morale up, and we were able to move forward again. But it started to take more intense fire from all around that area. And so rather than waste any more time, I just told my men not to shoot me up, that I would run forward and finish the try to silence that specific anthill myself. So, and that's what I did. I ran forward from about 30 meters or so and threw the grenade over the top, went around to the left side and shot some more NVA that were trying to get me with my M16. And when it was silenced, I turned, you're the bunker and I'm over here. I turned to my men and told them to come on, let's go. We got to get to the platoon that was trapped. When I got shot in the jaw, somewhere further back, it wasn't from that bunker, someone shot at me probably with an AK, and went in here and deflected downward and went out my right side underneath my right jaw. It's the first time I ever had any serious breaks, and it kind of ruined my day. One of my sergeants, one of my squad leaders I didn't have an aid man with me. He was an aid man in Korea, and he was carrying the aid kit, and came up to me and patched me up, and 2 of my soldiers carried me back to the command post where the battalion commander and the command group was located. They continued to try to get up to that platoon that day, but they didn't make it. And they had run out of smoke grenades too, so my company commander, Tony Nadal, told them to fire some white phosphorus, which is like smoke, and it did a great job. It really put the fear of the Lord into the bad guys, and they were able to pull back that day. But Ernie Savage, the E5 that took over the lost platoon, did a super job, along with his medic, Doc Close. Both of those 2 individuals received the Distinguished Service Cross for their actions. They held off 3 determined NVA attacks that night. around their position by calling in artillery and mortar and their own fire. They went in with 27 men, had 12 wounded, 8 killed in action, and 7 able-bodied, and just did a super job of getting up to them. The second day, Cliff's unit came in, and they were able to get up to the company with one of his companies and B Company, the company that was had the lost platoon up there. They went up there and got them later that afternoon. But before that happened, the entire position had a tremendous attack, a couple of attacks from the NVA, and it took some pretty serious casualties. That was Bravo Company, or C Company. Captain Edwards was the commander of it, and he recuperated with me at Valley Forge Army Hospital in Philadelphia. But he kept up the fight, and they never penetrated our positions. Joe talks about in the book how another of my OCS classmates, the enemy were in his bunker, killed, and he had his hands around the NVA's throat, but they were both dead. So we had some great soldiers, great NCO leadership, and just a tremendous group of soldiers and officers and NCOs and troops.
Joe, you mentioned a while ago with the anthill, there was 4 different machine gun.
I don't know. They went out and searched it. I don't know how many machine guns are in.
When you went over to the anthill, there was several machine gun places, and from what I read, there was about 12 NVA they found that you had taken care of. So.
I don't know whether they're dead guys there. You just can't. Yeah. I can't take credit for. I don't know. That's kind of the fog of war. They had the body count. How many bad guys did we kill? It's about a 10-to-1 ratio. After 3 days of intense fighting, we lost 79 killed in action, 121 wounded in action. They're on panel 3E of the Vietnam Wall. All those guys that were fighting in that time frame. It's pretty intense. Like the guy that's on the cover of the book, We Were Soldiers Once and Young, is another OCS classmate of mine who's pretty famous. His name is Rick Riscola. He was in the other battalion, 2nd of the 7th, came in and relieved and came in and helped us out. Before the battle was over, the battalion commander had 9 companies under his command, 2nd of the 5th, and a company from 2nd of the 7th, our sister battalion. And Rick Riscola received a Purple Heart and a Silver Star. He was a soldier in South Africa in the British Army. And just a tremendous, Joe Moore said he's the best commander, battalion or platoon leader that he had in the entire division. Now, General Moore, after that battle, took over the brigade because he was about ready to make 06. And so he took over both battalions, the 1st Battalion and 1st of the 7th and 2nd of the 7th. Now, our lineage goes back to General George Armstrong Custer. And there for a while we thought we were in another little bighorn, surrounded and outnumbered. But we had a lot of assets Custer never had. We had the Air Force stacked up, at 1,000-meter intervals up to 35,000 feet, ready to give us coverage during those 3 days of intense fighting. And then we got more artillery support, too. We got 2 more batteries. We had a total of 24 tubes of 105 howitzers providing close support for us. Plus our own mortars.
Those 4 batteries fired 22,000 rounds of 105 millimeter artillery in those 3 days and 2 nights. They kept us warm.
Rick Riscola left the Army and became head of security for Morgan Stanley in 2011. Or in 9/11/2001, and is credited with saving over 2,500 lives of the employees of Morgan Stanley. When he told about he was in the South Tower, North Tower got hit first. He said, "Everybody evacuate the building." like they had been practicing for a number of years, the fire drills, and they all made it out except for about 6, and he was one that he went back in to make, like a good soldier, to make sure the building was secured, and the building went down and his body was never recovered. So he's a great American.
Joe, initially, when the M16 was first issued, there was a lot of problems with it as far as jamming and so forth. Did y'all have problems with it there, or had they already resolved it?
We didn't have the banana clip. All we had was the 20-round clip, and we usually only kept them oiled and kept the guns in very good shape. We had 30 days to practice with the gun, with the M16, and we had the M79, which is a great weapon too, and the M60 were our 3 main weapons that we had. And the M16 was a pretty good, pretty awesome weapon. My dad was a state trooper in Pennsylvania, and so he gave me one of his 38 snub-nose six-shot pistol. Had a 2-inch barrel, and I carried it under my fatigues for a while. Then we sawed off a 12-gauge. I didn't know it was illegal at the time by NATO rules, but we sawed off a 12-gauge shotgun. The barrel was about that long, and the stock was. And it was. I gave it to my point man because I figured it'd be a pretty good weapon for the point man. But there was an incident in our battalion where a soldier was shot in the buttocks with one of the personal weapons. It wasn't mine, but. And so after that, the general said, okay, everybody had to turn all their personal weapons. So, and we were pretty confident of the M16 by then too, because it had been pretty effective. I took basic with the M1. I took advanced individual training with the M14. In an OCS, we carried the M16. So I had from World War II to Korea and Vietnam, all the weapons that the Army used, I had my guys or I had experience with. And we did have some M14s, but not too many, mostly the M16. And I didn't experience any problems. Some of the other vets out here may have had some problems with it, but my second tour, we didn't have any problems with either. We had the banana clip in '69 when I went back.
So how long were you in the hospital?
I spent 3 months. I was kind of a walking wounded. You know, my mouth was wired shut. I was on a strained baby food diet for a couple of months. Because my teeth were wired shut, and so it was kind of hard to chew a steak. But and then I returned to Fort Benning after I recuperated from November to February. So and some of the other guys, like I said, Captain Edwards had a back wound and was recuperating. He was in our unit too, Captain Edwards. Second, he had Charlie Company, and was wounded pretty severely in the back.
So you went back for your second tour in '69?
Yes, I went back I got a letter from my company commander saying he's putting me in for a very high award. He didn't say what it was, so I got a silver star at a nice ceremony at a minor league baseball game down in Florida. And I said, that's a high award. That's the 3rd highest. So then a couple of months later, I got a call from a reporter named Ed Heimoff that I was being put in. I was going to get the Medal of Honor, and so on the 19th of December, 13 months after the battle, at a very nice ceremony on the river entrance. It was an outside ceremony during the Johnson administration. It was presented to me by the Secretary of the Army, Stanley Reeser, and you know, I was shaking in my boots. You know, I was a first lieutenant by then, you know, but I'd never been around such high brass. You know, from the Chief of Staff of the Army to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs were there. And a lot of the generals could fall out and attend the ceremony because it was an outside ceremony, not like the White House ceremonies where you're only limited to about 250. And it was a cold, cold day in December, and I had to borrow an Army top coat because I didn't have one in my kit. But it was all my relatives were there, and a lot of the units, the men that I served with, were there. And so that was very special to see them again. They flew up in a plane from Fort Benning for the ceremony.
Now, you were, matter of fact, out the first day.
I was a casualty the first day. The battle lasted 2 more days, more intense days.
You and Joe probably passed somewhere.
We might have been on the same helicopter. I'm going out and he's coming in that night.
All right. You got a couple more minutes in your time. Anything you want to tell the group or say before we get into Mr. Galloway's story? Or?
I always tell the people, the folks that I wear the medal for all the brave men and women that serve with us. I'm just the caretaker of the medal. There's so many brave things that happen in combat, as many of you know that have been in combat, that I'm just very, very fortunate and honored to be wearing the medal. Now, the 1st Cav Division saw a lot of combat in all the years in Vietnam. And there's like 28 out of the 259 Vietnam Medal of Honor recipients from the 1st Cav Division. And it's one of the 1st Infantry and the 1st Cav Division, I think, are the highest numbers because of how big they were and how much combat they saw.
Well, Colonel Joe
I'm just
Marm,
very fortunate to be here, and I want to thank you all for your service, and just an honor for me to be among the living.
Well, Colonel Joe Marm, you wear it well.
I have an excuse for slurring my words, with my wound there.
I thought it was just a Southern accent.
Right.
Well, you wear the Medal of Honor with greatly and represent it great. And I've never seen anybody who didn't say that you were one of the finest men they'd ever met.
No, thank you.
And I know that when we posted on Facebook about this event, it was amazing how many pictures of you and all the accolades that the veterans you had talked with and so forth over the years. And like I said, you wear it well, and we thank you for what you've done and what you're doing tonight, and what you continue to do.
Thank you. And I knew Lawrence Joel. He was a great American, and it's very tragic the way he died. He was a diabetic, and he had been divorced, and he was by himself, and he went into diabetic coma, and there was no one around to help him. And so that's very, very tragic. But he was a great American. I've been to many events before he died with him, and he's just a super guy.
I think he has some daughters who still live in the Winston-Salem area, if I remember correctly. Well, I wanted to now introduce our next speaker. Before I do that, I want to introduce 2 people who make sure that Joe Galloway gets where he wants to go. Doug Gracie here, his wife, and the wonder dog that's sitting with her. I know that's how Joe gets around and so forth. So she takes good care of him. Now our next speaker was Joe Galloway. Some of you know him from the book and the movie and so forth. So he kind of came in as Joe Marm left, and he was involved there. And I know he was depicted in the movie. And later you might want to ask him how much the movie was like his story in the movie and his story in real life, how they were. Mr. Joe Galloway, appreciate you being here, war correspondent forever, it seems like. You covered a lot of wars before and after, and the question I want to ask you, just the same question, is, oh, by the way, Joe received, as a civilian, received the Bronze Star with V device. I don't think there's anybody else ever got one of those that's a civilian. That's pretty special in itself. Not to mention all the other awards as war correspondent and so forth he's got. But I want to start out by asking you the same question that I had started out with Lieutenant Marm, was tell us a little bit about Sergeant Major Plumlee and so forth.
Basil Plumlee. I met him a couple of 3 days before this operation on another operation, what they call a long hot walk in the sun up in the mountains east of Play Me Special Forces Camp. And we did a helicopter assault into an area with Montagnard Village. And that was, all wars are strange, and you have to have a taste for black humor to survive them. And we marched into this Montagnard village, houses, thatched houses up on stilts. And these are nomadic people. They stay a few years. When the soil wears out, they move. And when we marched in, there was an old man, no teeth, kind of wrinkled and brown, and he came hustling out of the door of this longhouse, pulling on an old French army tunic, and he had a tricolor flag. He thought his old comrades had come back at last. And it just, I just looked at that and shook my head, because I knew something. I knew we were going to leave sooner or later, and we would abandon him and his people. They had been betrayed so many times before, and they were again. But I met Sergeant Major Plumlee the next morning. We crossed a neck-deep mountain stream right before dark, and so we're soaking wet. We're on a mountain plateau at about 4,000 feet, and we dug a quick foxhole, each of us. And then it was light discipline, no fire, no cigarettes, no nothing. And we sat there all night just shivering, wet, cold as I've ever been. And I spent 3 years in Moscow, where it got 55 below zero. I still think that night on that plateau was bad. Come the next morning, there's a little light coming in the sky, and I figured that's past time. I can light a cigarette, and better yet, I can pinch off a chunk of C4 and get my canteen cup and get ready to boil me some coffee water. And I had just fired it and was sitting there when I looked up, and there stood Colonel Moore and Sergeant Major Plumlee. And the colonel looked at me, and he looked at my canteen cup full of water, which was now boiling, and he said, "You know, son, in this outfit we all shave." And I looked at him, and the sergeant major was grinning like a monkey eating cuckleburs. And I repurposed my shaving water, my coffee water, for shaving water. And then I met Plumlee when I came in, but the real meeting was the next morning after I landed in X-ray. Came in there about 8 o'clock at night on the last lift flown by old Snake Crandall. And the next morning, once again, I was thinking about a cup of coffee, thinking about boiling up some water, and about then the whole world fell apart. And there was gunfire from every direction, rockets, you name it, we had it. And I was flat on my belly, just cussing my buttons and zippers for putting me that much higher in the air. And I felt a thump in my ribs, and I looked to see if I'd been hit and see what it was. And what it was a size 12 combat boot on the foot of Sergeant Major Plumlee. And he bent at the waist, and he hollered down at me, and he had a commanding voice, and he needed it because there's nothing noisier than a gunfight, especially with the artillery and the bombs and everything else. And he hollers down at me, and what he says is this: "Can't take no pictures laying there on the ground, sonny." Well, I thought about that for a minute, and I thought, he's right. Later I would learn sergeants major are always right. But I thought about it, and like a fool, I got up. I figured odds are good we're all going to die here. I had noticed that I was with Custer's old outfit, the 7th Cavalry, and there was a river close by. And it may be Little Bighorn all over again, and if I'm going down, I'd soon take mine alongside a man like the Sergeant Major. He was what the young paratroopers would call a 5-jump bastard. He made all 4 jumps of the 82nd Airborne in World War II: Sicily, Salerno, Normandy, and Holland. And he made 1 combat jump in the Korean War with the 87th Regimental Combat Team. The man was legendary before he got there. After his first 30 days in Vietnam, he could wear the combat infantry badge with 2 stars on it. There were only ever 270 men in the U.S. Army who earned that distinction of being an infantryman in 3 consecutive wars, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Plumlee was a hard man, a tough man, and I'm happy to say that in his last couple of years he mellowed a little bit, but not much. He was pretty tough all the way. When we were making the movie, Mel Gibson wanted to do an interview, personal interview with Sergeant Ernie Savage about various things, and he was raving about what a wonderful guy Plumlee was, and Ernie Savage shook his head. And Mel Gibson said, well, what do you mean? He said, Sergeant Major had a mean streak about that wide in him. And Mel Gibson said, no. He's a nice old man. I've been to his house for dinner, met his wife and kid. I can't believe that. And so Ernie tells him the story of Doc Lose, the medic of the lost platoon. When he joined the battalion, Plumlee took one look at him and decided he was what they call back then a little light in his loafers. And he also decided that it was his bound duty to drive such a man out of his army. And so for 18 months while the battalion trained, Doc Lose's main and only concern was to hide from the sergeant major. And he did it very well until that day he was walking across the quadrangle at Fort Benning, and there was the sergeant major coming directly at him, and there was no avoiding this encounter. And so he said, "Good morning, Sergeant Major." And the sergeant major looked at him and said, "Who the hell appointed you the weatherman, boy?" True. You can't make stuff like that up.
Well, Joe, didn't they tell you that war correspondents were supposed to stay in Saigon for the 5 o'clock follies? You weren't supposed to get out in the field and get shot?
No, nobody told me that. I spent 2 days in Saigon when I first arrived in April of 1965. I spent 2 days in Saigon. I got my press card from the South Vietnamese and my press card from the Americans. And with that, I had a ticket to ride anywhere in the country. And my boss at United Press said, "You're going to cover the Marines, who just landed their 1st Battalion 2 weeks before." And so I went straight to the Marines in Da Nang, and spent better part of 7 months covering every Marine operation in I Corps. The movie would have you believe I was kind of a greenhorn when I came into Landing Zone X-ray, but far from it. I'd been shot at and missed and crapped at and hit more than a few times with the Marines. So I stumbled onto the CAV because the Marines didn't have many helicopters, and what they had were the old CH-34 shuttering shithouse. And they didn't have many of those, so they walked everywhere. And I wore out 2 pair of boondockers and a lot of uniforms in my 7 months with the Marines, and I had a fierce case of crotch rot and pit rot and everything else. And I wanted out of those rice paddies, and I heard about this new outfit called the 1st Cavalry Division, which had 435 helicopters in their inventory. And I thought, you know, if I hang out with those guys, I get to walk to work. I get to ride to work. I've walked to work till now. I'm on a ride from now on. Of course, they didn't tell me when you got off the helicopter, usually you were up to your neck in it. And so that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Now, where did you go after IDRANG and you left with Hal Moore's group and so forth? Where did you go from there?
Well, I went down to Saigon for a few days, but Hal Moore decided that he wasn't going to have any combat operations that I wasn't on. And so I would get a call wherever I was to get myself to Ankh, and if I couldn't get there, he'd send a helicopter to get me. And I made most of his combat operations. I did the Bong San operation in January and February, which was pretty sporty stuff.
We will finish this on the next show, but we want to stop to kind of give you a moment or two, some things coming up. This coming November, we're in February. Where did I get November from? November the 8th. February 15th, we will be celebrating the Tet Festival. If you're in the Raleigh area, anywhere around, come out to the fairground, the Car Scout building. It was start about 11 o'clock. Bring your kids. The dragon dance, Bob, is awesome to see that for the kids and so forth, the dragon dance.
Legendary.
But you can meet a lot of Vietnamese people, good people, all the food you could ever think of, good entertainment. That's the Tet Festival, February 15th at Car Scout Building at State Fairgrounds, right off Blue Ridge Road. And then on Monday, that's Sunday is Tet.
Yeah, Monday.
On Monday, the 16th, we will be back at the North Carolina History Museum doing another symposium. And this one's going to be pretty special too, Bob. It's about POWs. We're going to have 2 former POWs, Bill Schuette, who has been on this show, Norman Gaddis, who's also been on our show. They're going to be talking about their times as American POWs. And then we're going to do something a little different. You know, everybody saw on news and so forth, this fall of Saigon with people getting on the helicopters, climbing up what was supposed to be the embassy roof, which was not embassy roof, how they were climbing all over and flying out the helicopters and dumping them in the ocean and so forth, and the boat people who came in afterwards. But what about the soldiers who were fighting right up until the time Saigon fell? What happened to them? And that's where we're going to have Colonel Hein Vo come in and talk about it. He went from, actually at the time when Saigon fell, he was a major in the Rangers for the Arvins. He was at a machine gun and went directly from machine gun to 8 years in re-education camp doing slave labor, almost no food, little or no medication. They moved from camp to camp. Every 6 months, they moved into another camp. He did cut trees and did lumber work and everything else. And so Colonel Hindvo is going to be telling his story. So that's going to be from 6 to 8 o'clock on Monday, the 16th, at the North Carolina History Museum on Edenton Street. If you're in the area, come join us there. Right now, they're looking like it might be a full crowd, but come on down. We've already got a overrun place set up for about 100 or more people. Come join us for that. We'll be back here the fourth Wednesday of the month to finish up the Symposium with Joe Galloway and finished up what Joe has to say, as long as what Cliff Haskins has to say. Now, you're probably saying, who's Cliff Haskins? Well, tune in next show and you'll find out who Cliff Haskins is. He was part of the Our Valley Battle, a very important part. And Bob, go ahead and finish up what you got to tell people about the show tonight, or whatever you want to tell them.
Well, I'd like to thank you for tuning in tonight. And as Bill mentioned, make a note on your calendar for Monday night, downtown Raleigh, 6 to 8. It is a chance, really, to step into history and listen to three people who fought for freedom and paid the price very dearly. 7 to 8 years in a prison, the POWs from America and from Vietnam. It's a chance you don't want to miss. We thank you for joining us tonight on Lessons of Vietnam, and we'll see you next time.
Bob, I got one more thing.
Please.
It's my turn to do one more thing.
Okay, Bill.
Put down on your calendar right now, go back in your calendar and put a note or a circle around March 27th, 28th, and 29th.
Sure.
Because one of those 3 days you're going to want to be at the North Carolina History Museum. We'll be doing Ron Harris's Etchings in Stone, and I can tell you, you do not want to miss it. We will have the 1/8 replica of the Vietnam Wall. We'll have displays of uniforms and so forth. We'll have helicopters, vehicles, and so forth there for you to come down and see. You can spend the day with us. The show on Friday night is at 7 o'clock. The show on Saturday is at 4 o'clock, and the Sunday show is at 2 o'clock.
Right.
You're going to want to be able to see one of those. The tickets are free, so it's no problem getting in. Again, thank you for tuning in tonight. We'll look forward to joining you the fourth Wednesday.
Thank you again, and stay warm. Good night.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCBVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.